Hi everyone. So I figured that I would stay on task here with my top 5 lists since so many of you have asked me if I would talk also about my top 5 Oracle decks of all time. I definitely had way more of a difficult time choosing these top 5 than I did with my tarot decks. I think with my tarot decks, it's pretty clear for me the ones in which I, feel the most connected to and work with the most in a way that's very, very personal. Oracle decks are different for me, so I'm just going to talk about that for a little bit. And I debated for a day or two actually doing 2 separate top 5s because I actually use Oracle decks a lot more in my work with clients than I do necessarily in my personal work. But I decided in the end to be true to the theme here and to stick with just 5 with 3 honorable mentions. So I want to talk about 2 different ways in which I tend to use Oracle decks for myself, but primarily with clients as well. So first and foremost, if I'm working with an Oracle deck for personal development, I tend to like to work with a heavier Oracle deck that has a lot of meat to the guidebook that either I can sit and journal about if I'm working personally on my own, or that my client and I can have a dialogue around. Whether this is an emotional wound that they're uncovering, or we're working through a sense of stepping into empowerment. Oracle decks can be really beautiful things for those type of like chop wood, carry water parts of our spiritual path. And so for those, I tend to like really meaty decks that are really focused on personal work, personal growth, and don't have a whole lot to do with divination. But you can definitely use them for that too if that calls to you. So please don't feel like I'm saying you can't if you happen to use some of these decks that I'm going to talk about for divination. It's absolutely fine. I just find if I'm working in a divinatory sense, I usually am going to go more towards tarot than I'm going to turn to Oracle. The other use that I really have with my Oracle decks is to be a clarifier in a tarot reading. In this case, it will help condense down maybe the bigger picture that I'm seeing in the tarot reading and really give me clarity. So it's going to hone in on giving me clarity so that I can offer the client more clarity in a reading, or so that I can experience more clarity for myself if I'm turning to the tarot for a personal reason. And again, looking for clarity for myself, using the Oracle decks to provide that clarity in a reading. So for that, I like a really short and sweet, to the point Oracle deck. Exception to that being Lucy Cavendish, Jasmine Beckett, Griffith decks, which I love to use as clarifiers in a tarot reading. And we'll get to that in a minute. But those are the 2 main reasons why I work with Oracle decks. And that's why I was going to do a personal top 5 Oracle and a business top 5 Oracle, but I decided that I wanted to stay true to the theme here with all the viewer requests and just make a top 5. That being said, I guess I didn't realize how much I really love tarot because even though I have quite a few Oracle decks, I definitely struggled with this list of like ones that I absolutely can't live without. So enough with that. I'm going to start the list now. And I have my notes over here in my journal. So I'm going to start just like I did in the tarot list with number 5. I'm going to work my way up to number 1. Number 1 is the Oracle deck that I absolutely refuse to live without. Like I just can't. I won't do it. So we're going to start with number 5. Number 5 is the Magick of You Oracle by Fiona Horn. And there is the box. Primarily, this deck has made the list from the clarifier aspect, although this deck also dovetails nicely into personal work. If you are feeling called to, go a little bit deeper with your deck than just divinatory clarification, right? But this deck is really focused on witches or those who follow a pagan path. And so it's really, really beautiful. What primarily speaks to me is the artwork. I happen to find this aesthetic very lovely. And as I said, it's a really great clarifier in readings. It helps me get down to kind of the emotional root And then from there, I can give the client clarity on maybe why they're going through something in their life at this time, or how best they can interact with the present energy that they're dealing with. So I love this deck for this reason. Again, I really connect with the artwork, and I have such like a warm feeling in my heart when I work with this deck, because I do feel that the authoress, Fiona, I feel like she really does walk a witch's path and understands that kind of reverence for the elements, for the earth, and for the ether realms as well. So I'm surprised that this one was in my top 5 at first, but it really truly is in my top 5. I love this deck. And it's one that, you know, if you told me I could only bring 5 Oracle decks with me, this one would get packed away. And I do think, because while I primarily use it as a clarifier, it can also bridge the gap and move over into deep spiritual work, kind of self-evaluation, uncovering aspects of the self through journaling with the cards. This is a nice double hitter as well. So if you're new to working with tarot and oracle decks, or if you're not sure what type of oracle deck you would prefer and you like the artwork in this deck, I would say go for the Magick of You Oracle. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And same as for the top 5 tarot decks of all time, I will have the Amazon links posted to these, as far as if I can find them still available for purchase on Amazon. And, you know, hopefully if you're looking at buying any of these decks, if you feel called to work with them, that will help. So next on the list is Mausolea Oracle of Souls. I think I said the title right. If not, again, the link will be in the description box for you to purchase. I have only just recently received this deck and been working with it. I still haven't posted a review up on the channel, but I love this deck. I could kick myself for waiting so long. I've been on the fence for so long about this deck, and it was through conversation with one of my lovely friends that finally was time to work with this deck and give her a try. And oh my goodness, this deck is really beautiful if you want to connect with various aspects of deity, and you also really do want to embrace the dark energy, the left-hand path, and the shadow side of things, as well as the light. This deck handles that beautifully. It's certainly not only a shadow deck at all, so you don't have to get this and only use it for shadow work, but it's really beautifully created and crafted to work with archetypes, myth, and specific faces of deity. And I love how it feels when I work with it. This one is actually this much like Magick of You. It does work really well as a clarifier. It's like to the point. As you see the keywords at the bottom, so for instance here with Chiron, the ferryman, we have necessity, focus, and transition. Those keywords, if you're unsure about a tarot position in your spread, the position of a card in your tarot spread, excuse me, you can use this deck and get instant clarity on where this pull applies for yourself or for your client. And in addition, you can do a lot of really deep soul searching with this deck and come to understand your unconscious motivations very beautifully as well. So even though this is a newer deck, this one, I was so torn between this and Fallen Angels, guys. I will be very honest with you. I love the Fallen Angels Oracle, but this one beat it out because I feel more of an emotional heart chakra connection to this deck than I do Fallen Angels. While Fallen Angels is very clear and concise, and the demons that are listed in that deck are really beautifully articulated by the artist, it doesn't have quite as much of a personal feel as this Oracle deck does. And part of when you're going to choose your top 5 all time, you know, I mean, it is about that personal connection, right? So this is Mausolea Oracle of Souls. I am absolutely obsessed with this deck. And it wasn't going to be in the top 5 regardless. And like I said, it did beat out Fallen Angels. One note about my most recent Scarabeo purchases, and I don't know if you guys are having this too. Maybe this was Scarabeo. It might have been Rockpool. Excuse me if I'm wrong on that. The warping, because I have the Unicorns Oracle here too, the warping that I'm having is kind of like ridiculous. This is a new deck. So if you guys have any ideas on how I can counteract that, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I don't like this warping that I've got happening. I'm pretty gentle with my decks, as you all know, but I digress. Mausolea Oracle of Souls is number 4 on the list. Next, we have the Kali Oracle. So this is one of those decks that I don't really use for clarification. I use for deep personal work, or if I'm working with a client shamanically or energetically, I will pull from this deck to give the client and I insight into their personal path at this time. I find this deck to be really, number one, the artwork is beautiful, beautifully expressive of the energy of Ma Kali, and very, very profound for journaling and for really spending time with this goddess, this face of the goddess. So I don't really use this for divination or to like understand, you know, I shouldn't say understand, or to be like, what's going to happen today, right? Like that's not the point of this deck. This deck is much more about where am I right now? Why am I here? Like what's happening for me? And how can I communicate with Ma Kali, with Kali Ma, in order to understand where I am and to bring her energy into my daily experience. So I love this deck, guys. I love this deck. And I was on the fence between this and Divine Circus for a little while, but this one is just much more, again, heartfelt. So I guess really my criteria for my Oracle list was very much about heartfelt. Where am I connecting with it at a heart level? And I definitely connect with this deck at a heart level. Again, it's very much one that you want to spend time with this deck. You want to get to know this deck. And you want to get to know this goddess, this face of the goddess. So if you're looking at the artwork and you feel called to work with this deck, I don't think you will be disappointed. And while I love the various incarnations of Kuan Yin that Alana has shared with us in decks over the years, the Kali Oracle beat those decks out by a mile for me. This is one that I want in my collection no matter what. And I personally love the artwork. I know some people had opinions on it. I'm personally very happy with the artwork. I love Jimmy Manton's artwork when he does goddesses, and I think he got Kali's energy, at least how I experienced her, spot on. So the Kali Oracle by Alana Fairchild with Jimmy Manton comes in at number 3 on my list. Okay, now we're in the top 2. These are like the 2 that if you said to me, Racine, you can only have 2 Oracle decks, these 2 would be it. Like, these 2 are the biggest deal for me when it comes to working with Oracle decks. As I said, I'm not quite as, I don't have quite, like, I need tarot. I love Oracle, but I don't always need Oracle, if that makes sense. However, these 2 Oracle decks I do need no matter what. And this is the only Lucy Cavendish deck on the list, which may surprise some of you. I do love Les Vampires, and I do love Oracle of the Shapeshifters, but Alice the Wonderland Oracle by Lucy Cavendish with artwork by Jasmine Beckett Griffith is truly my favorite of her decks. I'm still getting to know Into the Lonely Woods, and so I didn't quite want to put her on this list yet because I need to sit with her. I have a feeling she would have made honorable mention if I had had her a little bit longer. But as far as Lucy decks go, Alice in Wonderland is the one that I can't live without. Number 1, my number 1 reason why is because Lucy actually has read Alice in Wonderland, the entire series by Lewis Carroll, and the deck is it's so, you know that she spent time with his works, and you know that she understands the myth of Alice and what was really being talked about in those stories. And there is a sinister thread to the Alice series. It's been made into a Disney, pretty foo-foo thing. It really wasn't. And I love that she stayed true to that. And so because of that, this is a deck that's not just about love and light or pretty things. It's also about the dark. It's about being confronted, and it's about looking at personal motivation. So it's a deck that really holds you accountable when it comes to your spiritual work. As a clarifier, this, much like Mausolea Oracle of Souls, will just tell you straight what's going on. I love using this deck for clarification because it lets me know if my client or myself is, as with this card, avoiding honesty, avoiding and procrastinating in regards to time with that card. The cards really do call on you to be very honest with yourself. And as an aside, I am someone who loves Jasmine Beckett Griffith's artwork, and I do think that for the most part, she knocked it out of the park with the artwork for this Alice the Wonderland Oracle. So of all of Lucy and Jasmine's decks, this really is the one that I can't live without. Doesn't mean I don't love my other ones, but if I could only have 5 decks in my bag, 5 Oracle decks, excuse me, in my bag, this would be one of them. So I'll show you a few more images here in case you haven't purchased this. As I said, if you are on the fence about this deck, you are going to, you want to work with the guidebook. I would say please work with the guidebook. You will get so much out of this deck if you spend time with the guidebook. And then, of course, also in your readings, using those key phrases at the bottom as jumping off points, I have found to be very profound in my spiritual practice. So this is the Alice the Wonderland Oracle by Lucy Cavendish with artwork by Jasmine Beckett Griffith. That's number 2 on my Oracle list. And of course, number 1, the Isis Oracle by Alana Fairchild with artwork by Jimmy Manton. This is my original edition. I know that there's a matte one, and I want to say thank you to all of you who let me know in my recent winter deck favorites that the matte version is available, because that really meant a lot to me. I don't want to repurchase if I don't need to. This deck is my original. It looks brand new. Like the cardstock, there are some things Blue Angel does get right, and the cardstock quality on this one, the lack of borders, this deck has just lasted so well. Isis is my patroness. She's my primary goddess that I work with. She's my ride or die. I always come back to Isis in my spiritual path. I always feel her presence, even if I'm working with another face of deity. And I do feel that I am a daughter of hers when it comes to my work. When I step into sacred space to either be to offer a seer's lens or a medium lens, I'm always connected to Isis, honoring her, working through her sacred lineage. So this deck, I have never seen depictions of Isis outside of this deck that I felt like the artist understood her. To this date, I know, something could come up next month that's not, another depiction that I love. But the artwork is spot on. Alana's guidebook is amazeballs for this deck. I love this deck, and it's a very, very personal deck for me. If I've used this deck in a reading for you, it was very rare, or it is very rare. It's very much Isis giving you her blessing, in my opinion, because I really work with this deck for my own personal growth, my own spiritual path, my connection to my goddess, my connection to the sacred feminine, my connection to my gifts, and to understanding my myth and story. So if I use this in a reading, it's because I've been prompted by Isis in how I experience her to offer her blessing on the person getting the reading. It's also, I will not lie to you, much like Kali, the Kali Oracle, it's a deep deck. So you have to be willing to invest time and energy. Can you sense my theme? I love decks that make you work for it. I'm a Taurus sun. I like to put that time and energy in. Anytime you want me to invest, and I know if I show up, I'm going to be met with equal enthusiasm, I am here for it. And over all the years that I've been working with this deck, I've never been disappointed in her. Now, there are times where I'll take a break from working with her, but that's pretty rare. And she's almost always out on my altar, or she's on my bedside table. Every once in a while, she'll take a little vacation. But if you are unfamiliar with Isis myths and you would like to connect with her, let's say you feel like you want to bring Isis into your life, this is a beautiful way to do that. This deck is going to give you all the bang for your buck when it comes to that. You're going to know Isis myths better. You're going to know how to connect with her energy in your life better. And you're going to have significant chance for evolution in your soul path if you work with Alana has some really great guided exercises for each card in this deck that you can kind of dovetail and really, tailor make for yourself in your practice. And those are really helpful in feeling a connection with a goddess. So if you're new on your path and you're on a pagan or a left hand or an alternative spiritual path, this is a deck that will help you to see how you can personally connect with the face of the divine feminine. So again, this is my number 1. I'm sure you guys were not surprised. I can't live without this deck. And this in Tarot of Vampires, if I had to only choose 2 decks, would be those 2 decks. Because together they present a unified whole for me. I don't use this deck for clarification. I use this deck for a blessing or a sense of understanding root causes or shadow in a reading for a client or an energy session with a client. And for myself, I use this deck for spiritual work, for personal development, and for connection with my patroness. So I don't use this deck for clarification. It's very much a spiritual deck for me, and it's why it's so personal, and I don't do a lot of readings that include this deck because it is so personal. So that is the Isis Oracle by Alana Fairchild and Jimmy Manton. The newer editions of this deck are matte, so if you're someone who likes that luscious matte cardstock from Blue Angel, you will get that in the newer edition. This is my #1 Oracle deck of all time. I love this deck so much. I could just keep talking about it, but I'm going to stop myself. If you've made it this far, thank you. So honorable mentions, and I'm just going to go through these relatively quickly because I've already kept you for 20 minutes. The Lantern Oracle by Angelina Mirabitu with illustrations by Yulia Alejo. If you are looking for a shadow work deck, this is why this is on my list. This deck is it. If you're trying to, dip your toes in the waters of shadow work and you're not sure where to start, this deck is going to give you that assistance to be able to really go there and to spend time in that space. And because it was really created in honor of shadow work in Hecate's name, in that sense of her lantern lighting the path, it also has a beautiful connection to the sacred feminine. And the artwork is lovely. The guidebook is a guidebook you really want to spend your time with. And you can do card draws from this deck, much like I've shown in my shadow work series. And I will be doing a video very soon demonstrating how to do that with an oracle deck like this alone without tarot, because that's been requested. But this is a great deck for shadow work, and that's why it's honorable mention. I use this deck in client readings a great deal, and it's very powerful, very beautiful. It cuts to the heart of the matter without feeling like you just got slapped across the face. Sometimes I do like to get slapped across the face when it comes to oracle decks and spiritual work, but this is not, this deck will help you get there without needing you to, without giving you that kind of resistance energy. So that's honorable mention number 3, which is the Lantern Oracle. Honorable mention number 2 is the Sacred Rebels Oracle by Alana Fairchild. I cannot remember the artist's name off the top of my head. I apologize, but she's a very gifted artist. This deck I use primarily to understand clients' soul evolution and their soul story at any point in time on their path. It's also a wonderful deck for connecting with the sacred feminine and for finding your own wildness, your own sacred rebel within yourself. And this deck lives up to the promise. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's expressive, it likes to talk. And it's one that over the years I have just come to love dearly. It didn't make my top 5 because I don't need it to breathe. Do you know what I mean? But I do feel this is a very powerful deck. And if you're new to working with oracle decks or divination tools in general, this is a really lovely way to step into that energy. You can use it as a clarifier, but I don't really use this deck as a clarifier, very rarely. I use it more to understand soul purpose, soul evolution, soul path, and soul growth. And I find it to be a very powerful voice for that. Also, I think, when I was working at Made on Earth and I was managing Made on Earth, which is a lovely little retail store in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. And we had an oracle and tarot deck section. I think Sacred Rebels was our most sold deck. So it seems to be one that a lot of people connect with. So again, if you are new to working with decks in your spiritual practice, you may want to give Sacred Rebels a try. Okay, number 1 on my honorable mention, and it repeatedly was bounced off my top 5, is the Earthbound Oracle. So I'm going to say why it didn't make the top 5. It didn't make the top 5 because my, again, heart connection with this deck isn't the same as with the ones that made the top 5. However, if you are looking for a straight up, no frills, completely intuitive Oracle deck to use as a clarifier, this is the deck for you. This is my most used deck to clarify a tarot reading. There's no guidebook that accompanies this deck. You're meant to use it completely intuitively. It's a self-produced deck by the artist, and I fucking love this deck. It was really hard to not have this on the top 5, but like, at the end of the day, I basically have this entire deck memorized in my mind. And so I wouldn't need to have this with me if I was going to only be able to have 5 Oracle decks, if that makes sense. Like, it's one of those decks where, I love this image. It's one of my favorites. It's one of those decks where if you like it and you have the connection with it, it's very much, it's symbiotic, I guess. And so then it becomes like, I can see the images without having to have the card deck with me. And it's almost like, I don't know, as I'm talking about this, maybe I take it for granted a little bit, but it is my number 1 on the honorable mention list because it is a beautiful deck. It's very clear. If you don't understand a tarot card that you've pulled in your spread and you use this to clarify, you won't be able to, like, there's no prevarication with this deck. Like, this one's going to tell you what it means and what it's related to when you clarify. That being said, I only use it for clarification. I don't use it for spiritual journey work. And so that's also why it didn't make the top 5. It's purely a clarifier for me, but I love the size. It's nice and small. I love the backings. And it looks beautiful with any tarot deck that you use. Like, it just has this very universal feel to it. So whether, you could use OG Rider-Waite-Smith, and you can use Tarot of Vampires, and you could use the Marielle. Like, you could go across the board with different forms of artistry in decks, and this will dovetail nicely in a reading. So it's also a pleasurable viewing experience for the client and yourself. So this is the Earthbound Oracle. I will have the link below. I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the artist, but I will have that posted below. So that's my list, guys. We made it. We did a top 5 Oracle decks. I have to say, this one was so freaking hard for me, guys. Like, this was way harder than the tarot, and I sat with the tarot list for a little while, but the Oracle list was tough. The Oracle list was tough. And maybe my relationship with Oracle decks is a little more complicated than it is with tarot, but let me know what you guys have for your top 5 in Oracle decks. I would love to hear your thoughts and to see your lists. You guys always inspire me, and you give me new ideas for deck purchases, which leads to more unboxing and reviews on the channel, which I know you all love, and I'm happy to share with you guys. So I hope wherever you are out there in the world, you're having a wonderful day, weekend, week, evening, morning. And please know I'm sending you much love and many blessings in these times of uncertainty. You can always come back to and trust the grounded center within yourself. So don't forget that. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.